Amelia Carter was born into a prestigious family in Boston, where the Carter lineage was not only renowned for their business ventures but also known for generations of talented doctors. From a young age, she displayed academic talent and a strong sense of responsibility toward the community. Her mother, Margaret Carter, was a famous English-born surgeon who devoted her entire passion to saving lives. When Amelia turned 18, her mother died in a car accident, leaving her with infinite grief and a final instruction: always live for others, my daughter. From that moment on, Amelia resolved every day to strive so as not to disappoint her mother. Her father, Robert Carter, was a successful businessman who always yearned for his daughter to carry on the medical legacy, but he also unknowingly created pressure in Amelia's mind. She had to become an excellent doctor and uphold the family's reputation. Her younger brother, Lucas, though born later, showed exceptional creativity and technology from a young age and seemed unwilling to be constrained by the family's expectations, which made the relationship between him and Amelia warm like siblings but with some distance. He immersed himself in the world of programming while his sister devoted herself to countless hours of surgery at the hospital. In Washington, D.C., a few hundred miles from Boston, Ethan Blackwell was steadily making a name for himself as a leading forensic pathologist at the National Forensic Institute. He was born into a family with a tradition in the legal field. His mother, Helen Blackwell, was a psychology professor who often went to court to provide important psychological assessments for major cases. His father, Richard Blackwell, had been a federal judge, a stern but profound man. Since childhood, Ethan harbored a passion for delivering justice to those who had passed away because he believed the truth could only be honored when the deceased were dissected and every fragment of evidence was uncovered. With a cold, composed personality that rarely showed emotion, Ethan always made his colleagues wary but also admire him for his extraordinary analytical ability and tireless persistence at every gruesome crime scene. His older sister, Emily, was a successful lawyer living in Chicago with her husband and children. Their sibling relationship had a bit of rivalry over who understood legal matters more deeply, but on family gatherings, Emily always expressed pride in having a brother gifted in forensic pathology. On weekend evenings, both Amelia and Ethan often spent time working at the hospital or the forensic lab. Sometimes they would joke with close friends about when they would ever find someone to lessen the loneliness. Yet, having just turned 30, Amelia already felt her family urging her to marry. Her father texted her several times a day, urging his daughter to settle down to show his filial piety. Indeed, she had spent 12 years in medical school, plus 3 years of residency and another 3 years specializing in neurosurgery, and the pressure was mounting. There was no time for dating or meeting anyone else, aside from intense surgeries. Having lost her mother early and seen many terminal cases, Amelia poured all her heart into her work, telling herself she could not afford to waste a single day. Meanwhile, Ethan also frequently received urging phone calls from his family. His father more than anyone wanted grandchildren to enjoy family gatherings, and his mother constantly inquired about his love life, making him sometimes want to drop all that mess. But the path of forensic work was laid out before him: analyzing crime scenes, collecting samples, awaiting biochemical results, then reporting details back to the investigative agency. One late autumn afternoon, at a small party thrown by friends in an upscale restaurant in the Beacon Hill area, familiar faces like Isabella Monroe, Amelia's close friend, and Marcus Gray, Ethan's close friend, happened to sit at the same table. Isabella was a psychiatrist colleague of Amelia who always understood her best. Marcus was a young prosecutor who often worked with Ethan because the fields of medicine and forensic pathology were inseparable. Over a few glasses of wine, Isabella and Marcus confided in each other about their friends' predicaments. Their work was too busy, families constantly pressured them, but they rarely had time to get to know someone or date. Amid the soft music and laughter, they decided to matchmake Amelia and Ethan as a way to save their families from worry. Although they had only just heard the other's name, neither Amelia nor Ethan was truly enthusiastic. However, When Isabella and Marcus pressed with suggestive glances and knowing smiles, both reluctantly nodded, "Okay, we'll give it a try and decide later." The next morning, Amelia received a call from Isabella, asking her to go to a small cafe on Lafayette Street where Isabella had reserved a table for the three of them. She sighed, grabbed her laptop with a surgical case file and hurried there on time. The familiar cafe scene, with weak sunlight filtering through the trees, greeted her. The others were already seated in a quiet corner. Ethan appeared shortly afterward, adjusting his tie and wearing a black suit, his face unsmiling but his eyes sparking with curiosity. They sat facing each other, their gazes met briefly before quickly drifting away. Isabella quickly introduced them. "This is Dr. Amelia Carter, Boston's top neurosurgeon, and this is Dr. Ethan Blackwell, an outstanding forensic pathologist at the National Forensic Institute." Both nodded politely, but no one uttered an empty "nice to meet you." Instead, an extended silence followed, as though these two strangers had never heard of each other. After a few sentences about work plans, they parted ways, setting a future meeting. Accompanied by obvious awkwardness. Returning home to her spacious, simply decorated but warmly toned Back Bay apartment in Boston, Amelia set down her handbag, rubbed her forehead, and wondered, who is Ethan? How cold is he really? Yet she smiled softly to herself, whatever, marry first, find love later. Meanwhile, in Washington, Ethan tossed his keys onto the table, sat quietly before his computer screen and tried to dismiss his father's texts. "Get married, son. Your sister already has 2 kids." He muttered, "Well, I'll just meet her first, maybe this is fate." Then he turned off the lights and fell asleep like a machine waiting for the next case. That night, on a brief phone call, Amelia's father urged his daughter again. "Margaret in England just called. She wants you to marry before you turn 31 next year. Don't let your love life drag on too long." Amelia shook her head, her voice tired. "Don't worry, Dad. I've agreed to meet someone. I'll settle it soon." On her bedroom wall, a small portrait of her mother hung like a reminder. "You must follow your mother's will, live for others." A notification bell rang. It was from Marcus. "Isabella and I have completed the sponsorship paperwork to register your marriage in Boston this Friday. I ask, can we use fake names to arrange this for both families?" That question made Amelia's heart skip a beat. She murmured, "Marry in haste, then take it as it comes." Then she replied to Marcus, "Okay, I agree. See you Friday." Friday afternoon was bathed in gentle golden sunlight. The small yet dignified room at Boston City Hall glowed. Amelia wore a navy shift dress and her hair in a neat bun. Her face bore a serious, professional expression. Ethan appeared in a perfectly tailored black suit, hair neatly combed, his eyes showing no emotion. The two stood before the administrative official, exchanged a few sentences to ask for signatures, and pressed their fingerprints. The ceremony went by so quickly that Isabella and Marcus only managed a light applause and took commemorative photos. There was no lavish wedding banquet, just both sets of parents standing quietly, wearing smiles that mixed joy with a hint of worry. Amelia's father, Robert, hugged his daughter, silently praying that she would be happy with this suitable partner. Ethan's father, Richard, placed a hand on his son's shoulder, nodding in approval. In that moment, their gazes met. Amelia offered her new husband a polite smile. Ethan returned that smile, though his eyes remained cold. Outsiders could not know what lay within their hearts. In that brief instant, they officially became husband and wife, even though neither truly knew the other. On the drive back to their shared apartment, Amelia watched Boston sparkle as dusk settled. She thought, now that I'm married, everything's fine. Yet she felt a pang of hesitation, for she had never dated anyone or stood at a real wedding before. Meanwhile, upon returning to Washington, Ethan quickly resumed his work routine. He stood alone in the silent forensic lab, gazing at the marriage certificate taped to his filing cabinet. His father's words echoed in his mind, "Now you can work with peace of mind, because you have a family. Ethan sighed, folded the paper, and placed it in a drawer. He turned away from the hastily taken wedding photo and continued analyzing pending test samples. That night, though apart, their hearts began to open. Amelia looked forward to a new future where she could balance family and career. Ethan also realized that this marriage was not merely a way to escape family pressure, but might bring him a sincere companion. Neither of them knew where the road ahead would lead, but at least the marry first, love later journey had officially begun, opening a new chapter full of surprises. The morning after the registration ceremony, dawn light filtered through the window of their high-rise Back Bay apartment in Boston, illuminating every corner. Amelia quietly went to the kitchen to make a cup of coffee, then sat at the desk to prepare the files for her surgery that day, as though unaware that her husband had left the city around midnight. Ethan had taken a flight back to Washington, D.C. immediately after signing the papers in order to make it to his shift at the Forensic Institute on time. In a note sent to Marcus, he had written only, "The flight returns me in time for tomorrow morning's autopsy. Our marriage is confirmed." There was not a trace of emotion about this newly born marriage among those dry words. Amelia called Lucas, her brother in San Francisco, to tell him she had put on the simple wedding dress to take some commemorative photos, and they teased each other playfully about when there would be nephews and nieces. Lucas only laughed and teased, "Don't get your hopes up, sis. I'm still young and not ready to marry." Amelia responded with a faint smile, "Whether you want to or not, you'll play the role of brother so our parents stop worrying." After ending the call, she turned to the thick stack of files, preparing to head into her early morning neurosurgery. The cafe on the street not far from the hospital had her usual strong black coffee ready, a ritual she never skipped before any surgery. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Ethan entered the forensic lab at the National Forensic Institute, where the large window offered a view of the Potomac River winding by. He carefully examined each histological sample, noting every detail: bloodstains, bruises, and scratches around the victim's neck. Everything proceeded as usual, as if that hasty marriage had never existed. Colleagues greeted him with respectful smiles, all knowing Ethan disliked discussing personal matters and remained focused on examinations, entering data into the storage system. A small card had been placed on his desk for him to see, "Congratulations on yesterday." Signed hastily by Marcus. He smiled faintly, pinched the card lightly, and then pushed it aside, returning to the unresolved histology sample. At noon, Amelia ate a quick lunch of salad and chicken soup in the hallway outside the operating room, still dressed in her clean surgical attire, hair neatly tied. She looked at her phone and saw only messages from friends asking about yesterday's small ceremony. She replied tersely, "Everything's fine." She didn't call Ethan, knowing he was busy handling a homicide scene. Instead, she texted Marcus, "Have you confirmed all the sponsorship procedures? I need to purchase joint health insurance soon." Marcus replied, "I've handled it. Rest assured." Amelia sighed, turned back to her mountain of files, and continued entering medical records and prepping for her afternoon surgery. In the afternoon, just before entering the operating room, Amelia received a call from the Boston Forensic Department regarding an autopsy related to a serious traffic accident. She immediately instructed the examination team to urgently forward preliminary reports for her reference. At the same time, she prepared her protective gear and necessary medical equipment to begin surgery. In her mind flickered the image of the first patient Ethan had once saved during a work trip in New York, making her smile slightly but also feel an odd loneliness. A few gentle probes, a few precise cuts, and the surgery was a success. The assistant surgeon praised her, "Amelia, your speed and accuracy are as impressive as always." She only nodded lightly, not feeling any warm happiness, as her mind was already on future surgeries and research projects. Returning to her apartment at sunset, Amelia stopped by a convenience store to pick up a few items for dinner. Opening the fridge, she saw 2 leftover salads, set them aside, and prepared a simple meal: pan-seared chicken breast, a plate of mixed vegetables, and steaming rice. While washing dishes, the phone rang. Looking at the screen, she saw a missed call notification from a Washington, D.C. number. She smiled, wondering if it was Ethan calling, but she didn't answer. Instead, she responded to a message: "The surgery went well. How are you?" The message was sent, and the screen showed read, but no reply came. She put down her phone and quietly ate in front of the TV, alternating between world news and the weather forecast. At the same time, Ethan had left the Forensic Institute and returned to his quarters near the office. He opened his laptop, reviewed the completed case files, then quickly typed some messages to Marcus. "I've forwarded the forensic report to the investigative agency. They'll verify the suspect's statement tomorrow morning." After sending, he glanced at the small screen showing their hastily taken wedding photo from Boston City Hall. For a moment, he paused, his eyes following Amelia's forced smile in the frame, then sighed. He tapped the photo lightly with his finger, as if searching for something hidden behind that smile. Before turning off the lights, Ethan opened his video call app, skimmed through his contacts, and paused on Amelia. He hit call but immediately disconnected, then checked his schedule for the next day: an urgent meeting with the head of forensic department to discuss a complex case. He thought, "Tomorrow will be busy, there's no time to talk with my wife." Then he closed his laptop, lay back on the bed, closed his eyes, and tried to forget that strange smile. In the quiet room, only the soft hum of the air conditioner lingered, and a faint thought in his mind: does she really want to stay with me? Early the next morning, Amelia woke at 5 a.m. to prepare for the day's deadline surgery. She glanced at her phone and saw a new message from Ethan: "There's a charity track and field event in Bethesda this weekend. Can you join?" A simple invitation, but it carried the first friendly overture since their marriage. Amelia smiled and replied, "Sure, I'll arrange my schedule." She told herself, this might be the start of real meetings. And so, amidst the relentless pace of their work, the newlywed husband and wife began to reveal the first puzzle pieces to warm their long-frozen hearts, ready to embark on the marry first, love later journey full of surprises ahead. When the weekend arrived, the weather in Washington, D.C. was chilly with a hint of warm sunlight. The gentle spring air made the paths of Bethesda National Park come alive with laughter and the busy footsteps of participants in the charity run. Ethan arrived on time, wearing a gray t-shirt printed with the event logo, neatly fitted athletic pants, hair combed back, his eyes calm yet shining with rare excitement. He scanned the surroundings, searching for a swift figure, and then spotted Amelia standing at the starting line. She wore a lightweight navy jacket, her hair tied back at the nape of her neck, her face bright and cheerful, completely different from her serious look in the operating room. As their eyes met, both of them smiled slightly, as if silently agreeing that, despite being busy, they would still set aside time for each other. The starting horn sounded, and the large crowd began to veer onto the winding trail around the park. Ethan and Amelia ran side by side, their stride steady, occasionally exchanging a few words about pace and the trail conditions. Ethan listened quietly as he felt Amelia's heartbeat quicken while climbing a hill, then, in one moment, he accidentally caught her earbud cord with his hand. She stopped, looking at him with mild surprise, then let out a soft laugh at her forensic pathologist husband's clumsiness. "Sorry, I'm not used to this," Ethan said, his voice deeper but warmer than usual. Amelia nodded gently and started running again. It was the first time they shared a space filled only with the sound of their footsteps and labored breathing, without work messages or heavy forensic reports. When they reached the finish line, a medical volunteer approached Ethan and patted him on the shoulder, announcing, "You completed the 10 kilometers run in 52 minutes, an excellent result." He nodded in thanks and looked toward Amelia, seeing her panting heavily but still bright-eyed, smiling radiantly. He gently wrapped an arm around her shoulder and guided her toward the refreshment stand. They each took sips of cool water, watching other participants lift trophies and sparkling medals. Ethan tilted the medal in his pocket in the sunlight and asked, "Did you run okay?" Amelia replied between breaths, "I did, but I'm happier having you by my side." A breeze rustled through the cherry blossoms just beginning to bloom in the park, making that moment all the more beautiful and warm. During their short time in Bethesda, they sat on the green grass and enjoyed the gentle sunlight. Amelia took her phone and snapped a few photos of Ethan, then edited and posted several on her social media with a caption about the charity run. Ethan carefully reviewed them and commented, "The photos are beautiful, you capture a unique perspective." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder so he could keep her warm after the grueling run. They spoke of upcoming plans. Ethan shared that he wanted to take an advanced forensic surgery simulation course, and Amelia mentioned that she might attend a neurosurgery workshop in New York next month. They agreed they would arrange to meet in New York and find a hotel near the hospital so they could spend more time together. That evening, when Ethan drove Amelia to her hotel, they parked by the roadside and watched the traffic go by. Streetlights reflected off the nearby lake's surface, creating a blurred, romantic backdrop. Ethan held Amelia's hand tightly, his eyes showing tenderness. "Thank you for joining me today. I think we need more moments like this to understand each other better." Amelia replied, her voice as soft as silk, "I agree. I'm very happy to have you by my side." In that instant, they both realized the invisible bond between them had been strengthened. No longer was their relationship merely on paper, it was gradually becoming real affection. The next day, back in Boston and Washington, they resumed their work, but each message they exchanged now included genuine care. Ethan texted Amelia that he had slept 6 hours last night and asked if she needed him to send forensic documents via email, while Amelia reminded Ethan to keep his throat warm as the weather changed. Those short lines of text contained warmth and sincere concern. They no longer worried about revealing their first relationship outside of work, because they now knew how to share and open up. Each afternoon, Amelia set aside at least 15 minutes to listen as Ethan described the crime scene he had just examined, and Ethan always asked about her stressful surgeries. However, life was not all peaceful moments. Just as they began to experience the joy of love, new storms gathered on the horizon. Everything was starting to feel perfect, until an anonymous letter arrived at Amelia's operating room. "Warning. Be careful with your cold forensic pathologist husband, he does not love you." The letter had no sender name but immediately sowed doubt in Amelia's heart. Did Ethan truly care for her, or was he just keeping her close to hide the truth from his family? Meanwhile, Ethan received a hidden package of documents at the Forensic Institute indicating that someone was investigating his private life, attempting to tarnish his professional image. That night, Amelia sat alone in the quiet operating room, tears blurring her eyes as she reread the letter. She wondered, do I really know him? Why would someone want to come between us? At the same time, Ethan, sitting before his computer screen examining the scanned accusations, was shocked to realize that someone had been silently tracking him and trying to attack his private life. He understood that to protect the love and reputation they shared, he would need to confront the dark secrets lying behind this. Deep down, they both sensed that their marriage was no longer just about escaping family pressure. They were beginning to fight for a true love, despite the many challenges ahead. Early on Friday morning, as the Boston subway's horn had just faded away, Amelia packed her luggage into a rolling suitcase, preparing for her work and leisure trip to Vancouver. She wore a tired smile at the thought of temporarily leaving hours-long surgeries and piles of cases on her desk. Ethan had already made all the arrangements from Washington. He printed round-trip plane tickets and confirmed a 4-star hotel by Burrard Lake. When Amelia stepped outside her door, he was waiting in a glossy black BMW down in the garage. His first smile for her was one of thoughtfulness. "Here's your backpack. Does it have everything you need?" She nodded, placed a hand briefly on his shoulder, and together they drove to Logan Airport under the midday sun. The flight lasted almost 4 hours, and both chose window seats to enjoy the sight of green mountains cascading below. In the quiet cabin, they observed rolling clouds together and felt the difference between the two cities they had visited. The cramped airplane space became their first private moment, where they shared plans. Ethan spoke about an upcoming forensic seminar in Vancouver, and Amelia talked about visiting UBC's Neurosurgery Center, where she had been invited to lecture. For the first time, they laughed together over their in-flight meals. She chose a green salad, he ordered a small steak. In that moment, their busy spirits realized that even the middle seat of a plane could be where intimacy began. When the plane doors opened to the cool Vancouver air, they immediately sensed the pleasant chill mingled with the scent of pine. At the baggage claim, Ethan carefully helped Amelia with her suitcase and everything went smoothly. Friendly Canadian airport staff welcomed them and reminded them to disinfect every corner. The drive to the hotel by Burrard Lake took about half an hour, but Amelia was engrossed in taking in the gleaming glass buildings reflecting off the water and the majestic North Shore mountains in the distance. She felt a rare peace, utterly different from the tense surgeries in Boston and the heart-pounding crime scenes in Washington. That night at the hotel, their modern double room with a view of the tranquil lake, they barely had time to drop off their bags before strolling along the nearby dock. Golden lights shimmered on the water's gentle ripples, with a few small fishing boats moored, creating a poetic scene. They stopped at a small cafe near the dock, ordered hot cappuccinos, and sat on wooden chairs facing the now darker lake lit by twinkling lights. In such a setting, Ethan unexpectedly took Amelia's hand without a word, as if to say, "I am here for you." She returned his gesture with a gentle smile, feeling her heart steady. The next morning, they rented a car and headed north of Vancouver to explore Capilano Suspension Bridge Park. The winding road cut through dense conifer forests, evoking a little bit of European mist lingering in the air. They walked side by side on the long suspension bridge, with a lush green valley below. The fresh air rushed into their lungs, and they breathed deeply. When they reached the middle of the bridge, Amelia softly said, "I never thought I'd see such beauty." Ethan smiled and looked up at her, "And I never want to miss a single moment with you." They stopped together, holding hands, letting the wind gently tousle their hair. Though it wasn't an ideal honeymoon, sharing such majestic nature had already strengthened their bond moment by moment. At noon, they moved on to Stanley Park, where a stunning seaside trail, moss-covered trees, and the Brockton Point Lighthouse awaited. They stopped at a grassy area for lunch, sitting on a small blanket and enjoying chicken sandwiches and fresh fruit. Ethan watched Amelia eat intently, then asked, "Is work in Boston stressful?" She smiled and exhaled softly, "Every day is stressful, but when I'm with you, I feel at ease." His heart warmed at her reply, and he squeezed her hand and gently stroked it. It was the first time they told each other that feeling happy wasn't just an empty phrase. In the afternoon, as the sun began to lose its golden glow, they decided to drive to Deep Cove, a peaceful village about 20 kilometers from downtown Vancouver. On the way, Ethan talked about a few recent local homicide cases, and Amelia shared stories about patients she had just saved after critical surgeries. They both laughed at the interesting details from their professions. When they arrived in Deep Cove, the fresh air blended with a gentle sea breeze and the faint aroma of cedar. They rented a kayak and paddled out to the serene waters of Indian Arm, enjoying the reflection of verdant mountains on the lake surface. Suddenly, Ethan's phone buzzed with an urgent call from a colleague at the Vancouver Forensic Institute. There was a homicide right near the lake, requiring him to get to the scene immediately. Ethan looked down at Amelia, his eyes determined. "Forgive me, but I have to handle this." She nodded calmly, "Go ahead, I'll wait," and reached out to wave. He hurried toward the shore, forgetting his forensic bag on the kayak. In his rush, he didn't notice the wet rock at the waterline. He hurried up the shoreline. The lake's edge gleamed with reflected light, and pebbles were slippery under his shoes. He lost his balance and slipped from a high rock ledge, crashing his shoulder and knee hard against the cold stone. A gasp escaped his chest as he felt his shoulder bone cracking and blood began to seep from the wound. From the middle of the lake, Amelia saw the accident unfold. Ethan lay still, his leg bent and body swaying precariously. She immediately paddled faster, her strokes decisive as if she were holding a scalpel. When she reached him, she maneuvered the kayak under the rock ledge and pulled close to his body. Blood from his shoulder and knee soaked the fabric of his clothes. She took the woven cloth she had brought and tied it tightly to staunch the bleeding temporarily, trying to reassure him, "Don't worry, I'm here. Just stay still, I'll call for help." Just as her voice trailed off, a group of local forensic staff arrived with a first aid kit. Together with her, they carried him to shore and laid him on a stretcher. While waiting for the ambulance, Amelia continuously checked his pulse and breathing, striving to control the bleeding to prevent hemorrhagic shock. Within a few minutes, the ambulance arrived and rushed Ethan to Vancouver General Hospital. During the ride, Amelia sat quietly next to him, watching the heart monitor and the alarming signals from the medical equipment. At the same time, she called the director of Boston General Hospital to report the emergency. "I'm in Vancouver. My husband, a forensic pathologist, has been injured and needs emergency surgery for his broken shoulder and a knee wound assessment." Her clear, decisive voice made the paramedics trust her completely, placing their hope in the abilities of a professional surgeon. In the emergency department, Canadian doctors immediately began stitching Ethan's knee wound and X-raying his shoulder area. The results showed that Ethan's clavicle was completely fractured in two. He needed arthroscopic surgery right away. Amelia was allowed into the operating room to assist local colleagues, helping identify the fracture location to install a titanium plate for stabilization. Throughout the 2-hour surgery, she held his hand and whispered words of encouragement, "You'll be fine, trust me." When the surgery concluded, Ethan woke up, his eyes rimmed with dried blood but a faint, weak smile on his lips. "Thank you, Amelia." His voice was hoarse but warmer than ever. She smiled softly and replied, "You have to live on to continue your forensic work and save others." That night, they fell into a short slumber together, both knowing that after this accident, his heart could no longer deny the feelings he had for her, and she realized she needed to keep him by her side. When dawn broke, they were no longer merely spouses on paper, but had shared a life and death moment. Each beep of the heart monitor reminded them how fragile life could be. In the hospital hallway, Ethan looked at Amelia, the only doctor who had rushed to his side in the storm, and felt a surge of protectiveness in his heart. And Amelia, seeing him lying peacefully on the hospital bed, was moved by the realization that she had used her own competence and life force to protect the man who had given her faith in true love. In the misty Vancouver dawn, the merry first, love-later dream had only begun to unfold, but fate no longer offered an escape. Their journey of loving one another after marriage truly began here, from bandaged thighs drenched in antiseptic and whispered words in the silent operating room. Shortly after returning to Boston from the Vancouver surgery, Ethan received a medical transfer form and instructions from the Canadian doctors, while Amelia guided him through airport security, her voice mingling worry and relief. "You'll be okay, right?" Ethan simply nodded, his eyes full of affection and gratitude as he held her hand. On the flight, instead of burying himself in his phone as usual, he turned to face her, his gaze tracing the contours of her face, melancholy mixed with excitement as he thought of their upcoming brief reunions. Once back in Boston, despite his shoulder still throbbing with pain whenever he moved, Ethan insisted on driving slowly to take Amelia to their favorite cafe by the hospital, where they ordered 2 hot lattes and savored the warm spring air in the city. They sat together in a corner by the window, morning sunlight filtering through the leaves, casting a faint glow across her eyes. Amelia whispered, "We need to rest so your wound can heal." Ethan pressed his lips together, took her hand, and gently stroked her fingers. "But I want to be with you, pain or not, it's worth it." She smiled, her eyes radiating tenderness, and placed a small jar of bubble cream on the table, something she had bought herself to soothe his surgical sight. "Let me take care of you, just as you saved me." In the days that followed, their lives seemed to pause in motion. Each morning, Amelia biked to the hospital to manage surgeries, while Ethan stayed home, slouched in a quiet armchair with his arm in a cast, yet continued to analyze forensic reports on his computer. Whenever he had free time, he video called her from the hospital grounds to ask about each case, and she checked autopsy findings and messaged, "I just reviewed the test results. There's something odd about that L-shaped wound. Once you finish your analysis, let's compare notes." Their blend of professional exchange and genuine concern for one another's well-being tightened their bond. One warm afternoon, Lucas dropped by to visit his sister and brother-in-law at their apartment, bringing a chocolate cake. Seeing Ethan lying on the sofa, his head wrapped in bandages yet still exuding that rugged, aloof aura, Lucas teased with a smirk, "For a top forensic pathologist, you really owe your life to your sister's emergency surgery in a strange city, huh?" Ethan just smiled softly, eyes drifting toward the window. "She's the only person I can trust." In that moment, Amelia's eyes brimmed with pride and happiness yet flickered with unease. Was his health truly okay, and after all the dangers ahead, would they truly build a life together? The following weekend, despite his shoulder still hurting, Ethan insisted on taking Amelia to see a physical therapist for his post-injury recovery session. In the bright clinic under white lights, he leaned forward to let her examine his surgical incision. Her professional touch on his shoulder made him wince, but he smiled wryly. "I'm fine, don't overdo it today." Amelia smiled, her eyes lighting up with relief as she noticed the bruising under his skin fading. "You still have to come to New York with me for that specialty conference, so you need to recover quickly." At that moment, their feelings for one another deepened, no longer parted by work or worry, but now sharing every step of his recovery. Outside, Boston was in full bloom with cherry blossoms, Calm Avenue awash in pink, a reminder that spring had arrived and their love was ripening. One afternoon, they strolled along the Charles River. Ethan walked beside Amelia, tapping her shoulder with a gentle smile. "Life is beautiful when you're here." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "I feel the same. Let's write our story together, okay?" And so, beneath the swaying cherry trees, they walked side by side, hearts in sync with the warm breeze, opening a new chapter for their merry first, love-later journey, one they had never imagined could truly be theirs. In the days after returning to Boston, though Ethan's shoulder wound had somewhat stabilized, he still had to limit strenuous movement. Meanwhile, Amelia was busy preparing for the neurosurgery conference in New York. She meticulously arranged the itinerary, finding a hotel near Mount Sinai Medical Center, contacting the organizers to confirm her presentation schedule, and submitting her paper on ventricular brain surgery techniques. Each night, they sat at the dining table in their apartment, sharing minute details. He needed to prepare forensic slides for his talk. She had to practice her 3D surgical model demo. Ethan gently reminded her that they had to maintain their professionalism as doctors even while traveling together, never letting their status as husband and wife overshadow their expertise. Amelia nodded in agreement, but in her sparkling eyes lay a happy glow at the thought that, for the first time, they would appear together in a city other than Boston or Washington. Early on the day of departure, Ethan drove Amelia to the Amtrak station, and they boarded the train for New York. Through the window, the cityscape emerged, skyscrapers and the Hudson River gleaming in the sunlight. On the train, they sat facing each other, contemplating the next 2 days' schedule. Ethan opened his laptop and put on his earphones to study forensic case files for a new Manhattan homicide, while Amelia edited her slides and sipped black coffee. They didn't speak much, but a glance conveyed everything. In that moment, their professional and emotional rhythms harmonized. Arriving at Penn Station, they stepped onto the bustling streets, weaving through the hurried crowds. Every time they walked side by side, Ethan held tightly to Amelia's suitcase to prevent her from being jostled. The sense of protection warmed her heart. The hotel next to Mount Sinai stood proudly in white and blue. The receptionists greeted them with friendly smiles and compliments for the admirable doctor couple. They received the key to room 1208, a small suite with a living area, a work desk, and a balcony overlooking the medical center. The room's minimalist yet elegant decor included wooden medical textbook shelves and framed brain maps on the wall, which delighted Amelia as soon as she entered. She neatly unpacked and quickly spread her printed conference program on the desk. Ethan leaned in to review and nodded at a few changes. In the slide about the murder case with the body hidden under the floor, you should remove that graphic image, keep it concise so the audience can follow. She laughed. I'll trim it. You're the expert, so I'll listen. That intimate moment stirred their hearts. It wasn't just professional collaboration but the beginning of an even deeper partnership. That afternoon, they headed to the Excelsior Hall to register for the conference. The spacious, well-lit hall displayed the logo Neurosurgery Annual Summit 2025 on a large screen. Hundreds of doctors, experts, and lecturers gathered, chatting animatedly. Amelia, wearing a confident red suit, presented on a neurosurgical method for tumor removal via arterial access. As she stepped onto the stage, the professional audience marveled at her sharp presence, clear delivery, and profound expertise. In the front row, Ethan watched intently, occasionally nodding in agreement, his eyes warm with pride. When her presentation ended, the hall buzzed with applause. Several experts came forward to shake her hand and praise her concise delivery and vivid illustrations. As they discussed technical questions, Ethan gently placed his hand on her shoulder, a silent sign, "You did great." She turned, returning his gesture with a bright smile. The next day was Ethan's turn to present on the role of forensic pathology in supporting neurological diagnosis. He wore a gray suit and white shirt, his voice calm yet resolute. On the screen appeared images of brain injuries and skull fractures. Using a blend of medical and forensic knowledge, he analyzed how to identify trauma-causing agents, helping neurosurgeons better understand each patient's condition before entering the operating room. During his talk, he searched for Amelia's reassuring gaze in the back of the room. She was diligently taking notes, smiling to encourage him. When he concluded and stepped off the stage, the lights dimmed, and the hall erupted in applause. Questions came at a steady pace, from neurosurgeons to forensic experts, and Ethan convincingly addressed each with sharp reasoning. Finally, when he walked down to the audience area, Amelia was waiting with a glass of water, asking about his next steps. "Do you need to adjust anything for this afternoon's session?" He looked at her, a quiet smile forming. "I really appreciate you being here. Thanks to you, I feel more confident." She smiled, eyes gleaming. "First and foremost, we're colleagues, then we're husband and wife." Those words, simple yet profound, seemed to reveal a long future ahead where work and love interwove. That evening, they strolled along the High Line, the elevated park above Manhattan, watching city lights dance in reflection. Compared to the daytime conference clamor, the atmosphere felt peacefully distant from traffic noise. Ethan placed his hand on Amelia's waist and gently held her hand. They walked slowly together, sharing dreams. He wanted to write a book on the application of forensic pathology in neurosurgery. She wished to open a 3D simulation training center. When they reached a viewing platform overlooking the Hudson, he sat on a wooden bench, drew her into his arms, and stroked her hair. In that quiet moment, city lights sparkled in their eyes, igniting the passion burning within. "We have so many opportunities to shine together," Amelia whispered. He nodded and kissed her forehead softly. "And you will be the brightest star in my life." That promise echoed through the silent New York night, sealing a connection that was no longer just duty but had blossomed into enduring love. Back at the hotel, they spent time preparing parallel work files. Ethan reviewed histopathology of a new New York case, and Amelia continued polishing the final slides for next week's event in Boston. They shared a laptop screen, discussing every detail, titles, fonts, illustrations. Late at night, with the final draft complete, they looked at each other with joy. grateful to have stood by one another. Before drifting to sleep, Ethan whispered, "I can't wait until we return to Boston so I can hold your hand every day." She smiled softly and closed her eyes, feeling his warmth spread through her. Together, they fell asleep dreaming that no matter how busy the world became, they would always find each other and create wonders, transforming marry first, love later into love and share every day. When they returned to Boston on an early morning with light rain, the warm sunshine of May had not yet awakened, and they were immediately swept into the whirlwind of their daily duties. Ethan still had not fully recovered from his shoulder injury, so most of his time was spent in the morgue at the Forensic Institute, organizing new case files and drafting reports for an upcoming hearing. Meanwhile, upon stepping into the apartment, Amelia only had time to peel off her dew-soaked coat before rushing to prepare for a last-minute surgery. They scarcely had any free moments to talk at length as they had in New York, but each time they passed each other in the doorway, a shared glance was enough to convey the unspoken reminder, "You are always on my mind." During their first week back, a twinge of tension arose when Ethan received a call from Marcus, his close friend and legal advisor. "Someone's digging into your background and Amelia's, wanting to spread rumors online that your marriage was arranged merely to legitimize your situation." Ethan slipped his phone into his pocket, his eyes shadowed with sadness. That evening, when Amelia was in the recovery room receiving her patient's postoperative test results, Ethan avoided her gaze and quietly placed a note on the table that read, "Someone is deliberately trying to tarnish our reputations." She glanced at it and gently asked, "Why are you hiding this?" He sighed and began explaining about the anonymous postcard. Her eyes widened, and her face went pale upon realizing that not only he but she too could be the target of such malicious gossip. The two of them fell silent for a long moment, without needing any more words, just a hurried embrace to release the tension built up over the day. The next morning, Amelia held a swift meeting with the department head to discuss the potential media crisis if the false information spread further. She remained calm and decisive, gathering every relevant document as evidence to demonstrate both the professionalism of their work and the integrity of their marriage. Medical records, letters of gratitude from families whose lives she had saved, and the email confirmation from the Vancouver Forensic Unit after Ethan's accident, all were neatly compiled into a single file. Meanwhile, Ethan spent the afternoon in the lab verifying the origin of the anonymous letters by analyzing writing patterns, phrasing, and identifiable markers. Together, they coordinated closely, sending corrective statements to media outlets and taking precautions against any leaks. What might have divided them instead deepened their bond, as these moments of standing side by side strengthened their relationship. Aside from the media turmoil, work pressures continued to haunt them. One afternoon, Amelia performed a 10-hour emergency brain tumor surgery. Exiting the operating room late at night, she was startled by a text from Ethan, "Please go home and rest. I'll be waiting for you." That message became a lifeline that lifted her out of exhaustion. She stepped out into the hospital hallway, holding her blood-stained surgeon's jacket, her eyes weary but resolute. She replied to his message with only a brief line, "You're so kind." When she arrived at their small apartment, Ethan had already prepared some light snacks, and the warm yellow light from the kitchen welcomed her. He guided her to a chair and spooned a few bites of hot congee into her mouth. In that moment, no more words were needed. They sat together in silence, simply listening to each other's breathing after a long, unsteady day. One quiet Sunday morning, Boston received a severe weather advisory, heavy rain for hours on end. To avoid overwhelming themselves, they decided not to take their planned stroll along the Charles River and instead stayed in the apartment to read and work remotely. Ethan sat by the window on a video call, consulting on a complicated forensic case for a patient, while Amelia sat at the adjacent desk, reviewing final details for her upcoming lecture to the Harvard Neurology Research Center. Occasionally, they exchanged a glance or a small smile, reminders that amid cadaveric reports and complex vascular diagrams, they still had each other to rely on. When the rain subsided and the sun began to shine, turning Boston golden, Amelia sighed, closed her laptop, and said to Ethan, "Do you want to go out for coffee? Let's avoid the outside noise for a bit." He took her hand and led her down Stewart Street to a small cafe called Juniper, famous for its homemade pastries. They sat opposite one another, the thick glass window behind them still holding droplets of rain. In that cozy space, they savored their steaming lattes and gently chatted about a day that wasn't too demanding. Suddenly, Ethan said, "I'm so happy knowing you're always by my side, no matter what happens." She closed her eyes and smiled. "That's because you have the courage to stand up for me, even when you yourself are hurting." They sat together in silence, cherishing this rare moment of calm in a city still recovering from the storm. Yet peace is always fragile. That afternoon, upon returning to the apartment, they each received calls from both sets of parents. Her father in New York asked whether they were planning a grand wedding once the crisis passed, while Ethan's mother in Chicago begged her son to bring his wife home for a visit because she wanted to meet her future grandchildren. Though well-intentioned, these inquiries added more pressure. That evening, they sat side by side on the couch, the soft living room light illuminating their faces. Amelia spoke slowly, "Should we go visit our parents?" Ethan looked at her, sympathetic. "I want to, but I don't know when I can manage my schedule. What do you think?" She nodded and turned to the window, where the city lights were beginning to glow. "I just worry they'll be upset if we keep postponing." They fell silent, knowing that ahead of them were days of balancing work obligations and making time for family, but they were ready to face it, because together, any difficulty felt lighter. A week later, the rumors that their marriage was arranged subsided, becoming little more than fodder for idle gossip. Social media buzzed with posts analyzing why a young neurosurgeon would marry a forensic pathologist, mixing praise with malice as they trended through cyberspace. One afternoon, while Ethan was busy analyzing data in the morgue, his phone rang with a video call from his father, Richard, who asked bluntly, "Are you and your wife still happy with this marriage? Many people are talking, and some even question whether she truly loves you." Ethan paused, looking at his father's stern face on the screen, then explained the challenges they had just faced, how they had worked together to counter the rumors, and assured him, "Don't worry, Dad. We're growing closer every day." Richard cleared his throat. "Your mother is worried too. The family wants you to have good news soon, but you need to consider carefully. After all, a happy family is the foundation for your work." After he hung up, Ethan was left with a heavy sense of responsibility toward his parents and their family's future. That afternoon, Amelia stayed later than planned at the hospital after finishing her case report. She leaned against her car, sighing as she remembered her father's earlier call. On the drive home, she gently placed a hand on her abdomen, imagining a small family with playful children, but instantly jerked back to reality, realizing she was not yet ready to embrace such a turning point. When she arrived home, she found Ethan sitting at his desk, his eyes focused on the computer screen. "I'm home," she said softly. He turned to her. She sat down beside him and warmed her hands around a cup of tea he had prepared. "My father called asking about me. He seems eager for good news." She exhaled and replied, "I'm still uncertain. Work isn't stabilized yet, and your shoulder isn't fully healed." He took her hand, concern flooding his gaze. "I understand, but if we want a real family, we have to start with the smallest steps, like having an honest conversation with both our parents." She began to cry lightly and leaned onto his shoulder. "You are the only rock I have. I'm afraid I'm not enough to handle everything." He hugged her tighter, whispering, "You are more than enough. Together, we'll be okay." Then, on a Wednesday morning, they received an invitation to attend a medical fundraising gala in Boston themed Medicine Meets Forensics. It was seen as an opportunity to affirm their serious relationship and present their shared vision, supporting brain injury patients and aiding forensic investigations of head trauma cases. Amelia and Ethan agreed to attend, determined to prove that their marriage was not just paperwork but rather a profound professional collaboration. They began preparing. She finalized her speech on the role of neurosurgery in saving victims of accidents, while he drafted his introduction titled Neuroforensics, analyzing cranial injuries to guide surgical treatment. In the evenings spent at their work table, they alternately reviewed each other's drafts, sometimes grinning when catching small typos, each correction bringing them closer rather than aloof. After a week of revisions, they were satisfied with the final manuscripts. Before falling asleep, Ethan whispered, "Tonight will be our chance to show everyone, this marriage is real, and so is our love." She answered with a smile, "No matter how much pressure we face, I only want to be beside you every step of the way." In the darkness, lit by distant streetlights, they drifted off to sleep believing that these challenges ahead were merely stepping stones for their love and careers to reach greater heights. One weekend afternoon, Boston's sky glowed pink as the sunset approached. Amelia and Ethan drove to Symphony Hall to attend the fundraising gala. Their shared apartment still held echoes of their final manuscripts. The scent of fresh printer paper and wet ink lingered in the cool air. They paused before the large red velvet drape. Under the soft glow of chandeliers, guests clustered in small groups, chatting animatedly. Ethan wore a perfectly tailored black suit, crisp white shirt, and a pale jade pocket square. A small platinum stud earring added a touch of elegance. Amelia chose a pastel-hued evening gown that accentuated her waist, with bare shoulders, her hair neatly swept up, and pearl earrings glinting softly. As they entered, many turned to admire the young couple, both striking in appearance and accomplished as a neurosurgeon and a forensic pathologist. A gentle violin melody began, opening with a cello concerto as the symphony orchestra gradually filled the stage. Amelia folded her hands over her chest and scanned the room, round tables draped in fine cloth, each place setting prearranged, wine glasses half-filled and flickering candlelight reflecting on crystal. Ethan gently took her hand and led her to seats near the stage. When the MC explained the gala's purpose, to raise funds for pediatric neurosurgery projects for underprivileged children and to strengthen forensic capabilities across the state, Amelia and Ethan exchanged nods, holding hands tightly to stoke their shared enthusiasm. They did not realize that their unassuming presence could inspire so many physicians, lawyers, and philanthropists present to bid generously in the charity auction. As the presentations began, Amelia stepped to the podium, her voice warm yet decisive. She spoke of a young boy with a latent tumor near the brainstem, who faced the risk of half-body paralysis without timely surgery. She outlined the prohibitive costs, the lack of equipment and expert teams, then highlighted the goal of raising funds to provide free treatment for poor children. The hall fell utterly silent, the only sounds the background music intertwined with her every word. In the front row, Ethan watched his wife with pride. He had never seen her shine so brilliantly. When she concluded, thunderous applause erupted, and several donors pledged support immediately, some even offering long-term partnerships. He joined her on stage, embraced her, and whispered, "You were phenomenal." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Together, we have done something truly meaningful." Next came the auction. Ethan was invited on stage to speak about the importance of forensic pathology in diagnosing head trauma. He recounted the unusual Canadian case where understanding how the wound affected the brain guided the surgeon's decision to avoid errors in the operating room. The audience listened intently, and cameras flashed as the CEO of a major medical corporation generously purchased 3 black-and-white prints created by forensic students. The proceeds would cover at least 5 pediatric surgeries. In the main hall, several guests approached them afterward, expressing admiration for how they combined neurosurgery and forensic expertise for the community's benefit. The evening closed with a soft piano piece, and the prolonged applause seemed to affirm every effort they had poured into the night. When the lights went out completely and the guests filed out of the auditorium, Ethan and Amelia lingered to savor their sense of accomplishment. They paused before the grand doors, street lamplight from outside cast long shadows on the deep red carpet. The only sound was their footsteps as they left the music behind. He turned to her, brushing a stray tendril of hair from her cheek. "We've proven to everyone that our marriage isn't just a piece of paper." She smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "It's heartwarming to see so many people willing to support our dream." Hand in hand, they stepped into the night, silent but with eyes that conveyed a promise. They would continue to walk this path together, their bond ever deepening. The next day, Boston awakened to a cool late spring breeze, cherry blossoms drifting lightly onto the walkways of the public garden. Amelia woke early and opened a window to inhale the fresh air. She leaned out to gaze at the street below, where busy commuters were beginning their day. Meanwhile, Ethan lay asleep, head propped on his arm, his face peaceful, an unusually rare sign that he was not immersed in work. Amelia went to the kitchen to brew a pot of green tea and then tiptoed to his bedside, peering at him. "Wake up, today we need to tackle those anonymous letters." He blinked awake, startled. "Oh, you've prepared them?" She shrugged and offered a mischievous grin. "Everything's on the dining table." They settled at the wooden table by the window, sunlight filtering through thin curtains and glinting over the scattered notes and blackened white scans of the anonymous letters. Among the scrawled lines, they identified details matching the digital signature of a private financial organization's Chicago branch. Ethan rested his chin on his palm and mused, "Perhaps a business rival is trying to sully our family's reputation." Amelia nodded, mapping out the connections between email addresses and phone numbers that had appeared in threatening calls. She carefully analyzed every phrase in the letters, noting spelling fingerprints similar to those in a leaked letter from his recent investigation. Together, they concluded that someone was exploiting the gossip to sway public opinion and sow doubt. Refusing to back down, they resolved to uncover the truth. That afternoon, Ethan met Marcus at a well-known Cambridge tea shop to share the evidence they had gathered. Marcus nodded gravely. "Indeed, someone is intentionally orchestrating this to undermine your credibility. I'll contact a few friends in cybersecurity to trace the email's origin." Meanwhile, Amelia spent her evening filing a formal complaint with the State Communications Commission, attaching their busy schedules as proof of their genuine commitments, affirming that their marriage was not a sham. They capped off the day with a simple dinner together, seafood linguine and a bottle of light red wine, sharing warmth and determination. Though fatigued, their eyes still shone with resolve. "No one can drive us apart." On the weekend, they devoted the entire morning to resting at home. The rain stopped and the sun emerged. Ethan took a deep breath of fresh air and lifted his gaze to the clear sky. "Now we can think about finally visiting our families." Amelia curled up on the sofa and replied, "I've been thinking about that trip too. My parents will be so happy when we share the news that I might be expecting." Ethan looked at her in surprise. "You mean we should announce it that way?" She smiled tenderly and placed a gentle hand on her belly. "Let's just say we're planning to. Whether there's a baby or not, we'll let nature take its course." He nodded and stroked her hand. "Then after this anonymous letter ordeal is resolved, we'll head to New York." They exchanged a sweet look, their hearts filled with hope for a warm little family. A week later, spring in New York had ceded to summer sunlight, its brilliant rays flooding the skyscrapers. Amelia and Ethan drove from Boston toward New York, preparing to visit her family. Along the way, they stopped at a small cafe off Interstate 90 to sip cappuccinos and share childhood memories. Amelia spoke of her school days at St. Jude's, where she once stood on a podium discussing her dream to become a doctor. He listened quietly, smiling. "You've come a long way from those childhood dreams." She nodded, eyes glistening. "And thanks to you, I dare to think of another dream, becoming a mother." He took her hand gently. "I believe we'll do well." When they arrived, the stately old mansion on the outskirts of Queens came into view, its wrought iron gate adorned with finely crafted floral designs. Helen, Ethan's mother, waited on the front steps, her silvery hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, wearing an elegant tweed vest. She rushed forward to embrace both of them. "My son, my daughter-in-law, your invitation finally came through, and you managed to make the trip." Amelia felt warmth at those affectionate, proud words. "I'm so happy to be here." Richard, Ethan's father, appeared behind her, offering a nod. His stern face softened into a rare smile. "Have you seen that I've prepared everything? Tomorrow we'll host a small tea party for family and neighbors." That night, they gathered around a large dining table set with pastries and Earl Grey tea beside a cozy fireplace. Amelia chatted with Helen about her conferences in Boston and Vancouver. Mrs. Blackwell asked how she had cared for Ethan during his emergency surgery in Canada, praising her. "My daughter-in-law thinks of her husband so thoughtfully, truly admirable." Ethan smiled and interjected, "Actually, Mom gave her good genes." They all laughed, the atmosphere filled with joy. Richard advised Amelia, "If you two have children soon, don't hesitate to let us know, we would be overjoyed." Amelia's cheeks flushed as she looked at him. "Yes, we will consider it seriously." The next morning, under a clear, sunlit sky, they drove to a cafe by the East River where Helen often took her grandchildren for walks. She spoke of Emily, Ethan's sister, who already had 2 children. Every time Helen looked at their photos, her heart swelled with pride. Amelia sat beside her, gazing at the gentle river and quietly resolved that she too wanted a peaceful home like this. In the afternoon, they attended a street food festival in Queens, surrounded by the calls of vendors selling Vietnamese rice cakes, Japanese sushi, and Mexican tacos. They sampled various dishes and chatted exuberantly. Ethan and Amelia both laughed as they watched children scampering about, time and again imagining a future filled with little ones running around, their laughter echoing through their home. Late afternoon, as they prepared to bid farewell to her family, Richard caught sight of Amelia's business casual dress and remarked, "Daughter-in-law, if you have children, Mother will start planning to renovate this room for you too." Amelia returned his warm smile. "Thank you, Father. I look forward to that day." He gently took her hand and quietly asked, "Should we choose a special date to announce the good news?" She replied softly, "We'll take our time, whenever the time is right, we'll share it." They embraced the parents, feeling enveloped in warmth, before getting into their car and heading back to Boston. In the early days of summer, brilliant sunlight streamed through the leaves, and Boston gleamed gold from the blooming tulip trees. Amelia and Ethan returned to their apartment, both sighing with happiness. The kitchen still held the box of chocolate cake that Lucas had sent before their trip. Together, they cleaned up and arranged fresh flowers on the living room table, white roses and lilies that filled the air with a gentle fragrance. Ethan placed his laptop on the desk and reminded her, "Tomorrow I have that hearing on the head trauma case. Can you help prepare the materials?" She smiled, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I'll always be by your side." That evening, as they settled in to watch a light romance film at home, the soft music blended with the flickering city lights outside. Suddenly, Amelia's phone vibrated with a call from an unfamiliar number. "Patient, 25 years old, severe head injury, need further analysis." Surprised, she answered immediately. "Hello, this is Dr. Amelia Carter." The voice on the other end was urgent. "We need your expert opinion on a coordinated surgical approach and forensic analysis. Mr. Blackwell will also need to review the report." She looked to Ethan, who gave her an encouraging nod. She requested all necessary information, paused the movie, opened her laptop, and began discussing the case in professional detail. Ethan sat alongside her, shoulder to shoulder, occasionally setting aside his medical gloves to consult previous examples of severe cranial injuries. Late into the night, as their professional discussion came to a conclusion, they were exhausted yet deeply fulfilled. Even as husband and wife, they still had the spirit to save lives and seek justice for the deceased, just as they had always believed they must. The next day, in Suffolk County's courthouse, Ethan was summoned to testify in a hearing concerning the cause of death in a head trauma case from a car accident. The prosecution argued that the injury might not have been an accident. The defense requested the best forensic pathologist to attest otherwise. Ethan entered the courtroom, his arms still in a cast from limited mobility, his gaze sharp yet composed. He began describing his autopsy findings, the type of wound, the angle of impact, the signs of subdural hemorrhage, and concluded earnestly, "In my opinion, this was a traffic accident caused by a sudden stop, with no indications of intentional external force." The judge's gavel struck, confirming his testimony. As he left the courtroom, Amelia was waiting for him in the hallway. She gazed at him with pride and joy. "You did so well." She knelt to tie his shoe, her face lighting up with delight. That afternoon, they went to the hospital where she worked. A 6-year-old girl had just been admitted to the emergency department with a severe head injury after a bicycle accident. The on-call physician reported the urgent condition. Immediate surgery was needed to relieve intracranial pressure. Amelia quickly changed into her scrub top, donned gloves, and grabbed her mobile surgical kit. Ethan and the forensic team stood ready just outside the OR to assist with sample collection while she operated. The tense surgery lasted 7 hours. At last, the hematoma was removed, and the girl's skull was closed promptly to prevent infection. He grasped her hand for a moment as she emerged, sweat-drenched but smiling triumphantly. "She will be okay." She looked into his eyes, which shone with unwavering faith. "I couldn't have done it without you." That night, they returned to their apartment and curled up on the sofa under the dim light. She gently placed her hand on her abdomen and confided, "You know, I used to think I wasn't ready to become a mother, but now I feel like I want to bring a little life into this world." He smiled, laying his hand over hers. The two of them sat quietly, savoring a rare moment uninterrupted by professional demands. As the clock chimed midnight and Boston fell into stillness, they made a pact. No matter how intense their work became, they would always guard their family's flame, transforming marry first, love later into love deeply every day. In that quiet midnight hour, a new beginning unfolded. Their future would be more than hospital corridors and somber forensic labs. It would include the laughter of children and a warm home. One early summer morning, the sun's warmth already hinting at the day ahead, Boston still lay shrouded in a thin mist when Ethan and Amelia woke while it was still dark. She murmured, "I thought I could sleep a little longer," but his eyes flickered with concern. "You have a major surgery today. I need to take you to the hospital." On the way, their BMW glided through deserted streets, streetlights reflecting off the misty windshield. When they arrived at Harvard Children's Hospital, Amelia changed into scrubs quickly, while Ethan lingered outside the OR, conferring with the assistant surgeon about additional forensic test results. The operation lasted 10 hours. Every time Ethan moved to process specimens, a sharp pain shot through his wrist and shoulder. When she emerged finally, her fatigue was replaced by a radiant smile. "The surgery was a success. The little girl is no longer at risk of paralysis." Ethan guided her to the recovery room and massaged her shoulders gently. "You exceeded all expectations." She replied, "We work as a team. I couldn't do it without you." In the dim hospital lighting, they looked at each other, understanding that behind every triumph lay countless sacrifices and mutual trust. A few days later, on a mild afternoon, they decided to reschedule their trip to Ethan's hometown of Chicago to visit his mother, and to tour a local forensic lab to inspect its equipment. As their car rolled onto the interstate, Amelia rested her head on his shoulder, watching white clouds drift across the blue sky. They stopped at a roadside cafe to share hot lasagna, laughing over memories from early in their relationship, their first trip to Bethesda, and the time he slipped at Deep Cove. By the time they reached Chicago, dusk had fallen and the suburban streets were bathed in the glow of yellow streetlights. Helen spread her arms wide to greet them with a delighted smile. "I didn't expect you two to come back so soon." That evening, they gathered for a warm family dinner. Children's laughter, the scent of grilled meat, and the comforting tang of wine filled the room. His mother leaned close and asked, "Daughter-in-law, I wonder when you two will start a family?" In that moment, Amelia's heart raced, but she smiled softly. "We'd like to take our time." He whispered in her ear, "No pressure, Mom just wants a big, happy family." In that peaceful instant, they realized that the journey ahead would be made meaningful by love and family happiness. Back in Boston after their trip, they felt the thick breath of summer, punctuated by the violet blooms of catalpa trees. Their small apartment felt cozier when they returned with a few potted green plants, placing them by the living room window. One afternoon, Ethan received a call inviting him to join a review board for a scientific paper on combining forensics and neurology, while Amelia hurried to finish her report for an upcoming world-class surgical training in London. They sat together at the dining table, discussing travel plans and preparing documents for the medical documentary crew that would be filming them. Bathed in sunlight, they held hands, eyes shining with pride. "We are building a long road together, not just for our family but for the community," they said. That night, when Boston lay silent, they quietly stepped onto the balcony, the city lights shimmering below like a constellation. Ethan whispered, "I realize now that even though we married before loving, my heart is fully yours." Amelia answered with a gentle smile, "And I will always walk every path with you." The cicadas hum from the tree in front of the balcony underscored the moment, concluding a long, stormy journey and heralding a sweet, fulfilling future. As summer in Boston slowly transitioned to autumn, crimson maple leaves began to drift to the ground, painting the old streets with romantic hues. Amelia felt a gentle flutter in her heart as she lifted her dress to reveal her growing belly. While drafting her final scientific paper for the Journal of International Neurosurgery, she paused, put down her pen, and smiled as she imagined their future as three: herself, her husband, and their soon-to-arrive child. Although Ethan remained buried in piles of forensic case files, he still sent her thoughtful texts every hour. "Did you sleep well? Do you need me to bring you any supplements? What would you like for lunch?" Their life had grown calmer, yet far from idle. The days ahead would be a harmonious blend of private joy and professional responsibility. One afternoon, Amelia invited Ethan to the public garden, where they had once laughed beneath the falling cherry blossoms. As he supported her in a gentle walk, hands on her waist, she glanced up at him, eyes sparkling. "Can you believe we're really about to become three?" He gazed at her face and smiled. "I believe it, more than anything, even more than the final verdicts on all the cases I've handled." The rustling breeze and the russet grasses formed a romantic backdrop for two hearts that, having weathered many hardships, now gently basked in hopeful happiness. By mid-autumn, an unexpected storm broke when a reputable online journal published an interview containing false claims about the forensic pathologist's oversight in last year's container body case. The article not only called Ethan's professional competence into question but also insinuated that he used his marriage to conceal the truth. The editorial team cited an anonymous inside source, but the details were vague, igniting a public uproar. The next morning, when Ethan arrived at the Forensic Institute, he noticed colleagues casting fleeting glances or giving him wary looks before looking away. A feeling of betrayal welled up in him as he quietly sat at his desk and scanned the messages from federal authorities. They demanded his complete autopsy files to re-verify the case. Meanwhile, at Boston Children's Hospital, Amelia received a call from her department head asking, "Is everything all right with your husband? Should you pause your duties to help him?" A wave of pressure descended on Amelia. Her career was at a critical point, and her husband's reputation was under attack. That night, she rode her bike through streets brushed with red leaves, her mind reeling. Upon returning to the apartment, she found Ethan seated at the desk, his face shadowed in the warm lamplight. She approached, placed her hand on his shoulder, and gently whispered, "We will get through this, like always." He looked at her with sorrow-filled eyes, gripping her hand tightly. "I'm afraid this time will be different." Yet in her steady gaze, he saw unbreakable resolve. Whether as a forensic pathologist or a neurosurgeon, they shared the same goal: truth and trust. Amid those early winter days, the city lay under a thin blanket of snow. Ethan had to suspend all forensic work beyond providing investigation files, and Amelia postponed all teaching and non-urgent surgeries to focus solely on gathering evidence to clear his name. They withdrew from everyone else, poring over every audio recording and scene report, using their forensic contacts to verify each detail. Long evenings passed as they sat together under the soft glow of a desk lamp, facing a dossier over 400 pages long, examining every line and piece of proof to show that the victim's injury could have multiple causes, not solely because of her husband. Occasionally, Ethan winced from shoulder pain, and she would type in his place. They would lean on each other, exhausted but unwavering. One day, a local newscast announced, according to the re-examination, forensic pathologist Dr. Ethan Blackwell made no significant errors during the autopsy. All allegations stemmed from an unverified anonymous source. The news spread quickly, many colleagues called to offer support, and the media's tone softened. That night, Ethan and Amelia sat facing each other in their apartment, saying nothing, simply embracing beneath the shimmery backdrop of the Charles River moonlight, allowing the restored joy to permeate them completely. In early January of the following year, with snow still blanketing Boston rooftops, Ethan and Amelia decided to hold a small celebration for the first birthday of their expected child. They sat in the cozy living room by a crackling fireplace, beside a chocolate birthday cake shaped like a white lab coat and stethoscope, a gift from Lucas in San Francisco. She paused her final paper revision, and he set aside his forensic files. Together, they lit candles and quietly exchanged birthday wishes for one another in a state of utter contentment. Each blessing was followed by gratitude toward the other. Thank you for always being here for me and our child. Thank you for being strong and brave so our family could endure. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on their faces, eyes bright with trust in the path ahead. They did not yet know what other challenges lay before them, but in that moment, all that mattered was holding each other's hands and welcoming the little angels soon to arrive. One mid-February morning, though much of the snow had melted, Boston air remained sharply cold. Amelia skillfully wove between kindergarten children on the sidewalk en route to Boston Children's Hospital, preparing for her final rare brain tumor surgery before officially beginning maternity leave. As she meticulously stitched the incision, the patient's stable vitals gave everyone hope. In the OR, her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. I just received the Federal Medical Board's final decision. You've been awarded the 2026 Excellence in Forensics Award for your contributions to the neuroforensic case. She smiled, her hands working more gently, her heart swelling with joy. 2 hours later, as the surgery concluded successfully, she emerged from the OR, wiping sweat from her brow, and texted him, I'm so proud of you. They agreed to spend the afternoon together, watching the local newscast's coverage of the award ceremony, even though Ethan still felt a twinge of shoulder pain and needed to limit his movement. When the broadcast showed him on stage in his sleek black suit, the stage spotlights gleaming, tears welled in her eyes. This is the greatest gift for both of us. Ethan returned her gaze via video call, eyes shining with happiness. I did it all for you and our child. By the end of February, once the snow had completely melted, Amelia officially began her maternity leave, only answering urgent calls as needed. Ethan temporarily lightened his forensic caseload, transferring files to colleagues so he could devote himself to caring for his wife. Together, they prepared the baby's room, soft pastel walls, whimsical animal prints, a white crib placed near a window overlooking a rose trellis. They organized tiny clothes and neatly arranged bottles and diapers on a shelf. One gentle afternoon, as golden sunlight played on the hardwood floor, they sat together on the sofa, their hands resting on her belly where that little life moved softly, reminding them a child would soon open their eyes. In that moment, no matter how turbulent the world outside might be, they were united in complete joy. Having journeyed from marry before love to love and nurture every day, they had braved every storm to paint a picture of a small, warm, and enduring family.